Australian bushfire crisis and the fact that it's ongoing. I just want to. There's a couple of stories that I want to refer to, but I guess I just wanted to start with the fact that it seems like it started very early this year. It's devastating in terms of the destruction and all that sort of thing. Obviously, there's been criticism of government level responses to it, which have gone viral and gone everywhere. The thing that I have noticed though is looking at some of the Victorian sort of angle to it is that it seems like the state government here was, I don't know if you want to call it ready, but they seem to be ready to jump all over it, and that was largely because of the learnings, I guess, that they took from the last time it happened, where I think there was like 170 or 180 people died in the bushfires, whereas it sounds like it's close to minimal. Obviously, there were some deaths this time, but despite the fact that the bushfires were larger and over a larger area, causing much more destruction, it seems like they were able to get people out and all that sort of thing. I don't know how you would, like, it's hard to respond to this type of thing, particularly in an environment where it's harder and harder to deny, that there are changes, I guess, happening to the climate, that these things are becoming more intense, and it's an example of a more intense scenario occurring. And I guess there's that also element of people arguing back and forth that, it's not climate change, it's just an extreme event and all that sort of thing. And it's interesting how the culture and people respond to these things when something real happens like this.
Well, I guess, it comes down to a lot about our society now, which is just litigious. It's all about liability and who pays. So I think, there's that aspect. On the climate change side of things, well, for anyone who says that this isn't evidence of climate change, probably in essence they're correct. But if we see more and more instances like this of extreme fire danger days over the next few years, then that is evidence. So why wait, to see 5 years of, catastrophic bushfires to take action? I do think that, if you want to take even the climate change out of it, this whole scenario is about humans and the environment. So, we may or may not be causing climate change depending on whether you deny or accept. And but more broadly, we live in these areas now in numbers that we have never lived before. We've urbanised these areas. And with that, quite obviously, we don't know how to manage the bushfire load or the fuel load within these areas. These are human problems. Fires on their own and even extreme climate conditions are not issues on their own. They're issues in the way they affect humans. And I think that now is where the dialogue starts to need to progress. If we're seeing these things and we're not managing as humans, or not coping with our responses, then, although the emergency response has been excellent, then we need to think and rethink the way we deal with the potential for these situations.
Just on another thing on the dialogue, which I find interesting, is how a lot of people I wouldn't say everyone, obviously, but there are people that don't tend to respond until they get something tangible happening. So Melbourne being an example, 2 weeks of really awful air quality, and Canberra was even worse at one point, particularly last week. And it's only then that, not saying that people were choking on the air or whatever, but obviously there's a lot, maybe people have sensitivities, will react a lot more, et cetera, and it seems like the discussion doesn't start to happen until something actually like this happens, and it's just in a way it can be frustrating because it's hard to understand. You shouldn't have to wait for an extreme event to occur for this sort of dialogue to start.
Well, that's right, but there are plenty of studies on this type of phenomena, and what unfortunately, or maybe the positive thing from this sort of tragedy that does occur, is that the dialogue then moves to the majority accepting that there's a need for us to change something or to do things differently. But unfortunately, it means that the remaining 15 or 20% who deny or don't accept just dig in deeper and just, say that, well, big deal. Volcanoes would have done this, whatever. And, unfortunately it entrenches them. But if the positive thing is that if the majority of people are now realising that we need to do things differently, that is a positive start.
Absolutely. And I guess you're never going to get 100% of people anyway.
Never.
One of the things that was sort of rams home as a massive example of to illustrate how bad this is the NASA I was obviously watching it from a satellite perspective, and there was a smoke plume that went across the Pacific Ocean, which drifted across from Australia. And it actually I'm not entirely sure if it's made its way back here now, but it was actually doing a lap of the Earth. That's how large it was. It caused issues in other countries, New Zealand being an obvious one, given proximity to Australia, etc. But there was also a South American country, I think, that also got affected.
Chile. Chile got a huge dose of smoke.
Yeah, and like that... if that doesn't ram home any sort of points about how extraordinary it is, do you think the dialogue needs that type of example just to really get things going?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if it helps or doesn't help. It probably helps with a better global understanding of these situations. I mean, we have had a lot of fire over a long period of time here in Australia over the last 4-6 weeks now. So that's something.
Yeah, I guess it's something, although the thing that interests me is that obviously the media pops onto these things when they've got something a bit more tangible as well to sort of go on off the news and be able to have a headline, so obviously the smoke plume's an excellent example, but the one that kept getting reinforced over and over and over again was the billion animals that they're estimated to have that have died through the bushfires, etc. That's the sort of thing that it's like it changes public sentiment or something like that because it's more emotional.
It is. Billion animals is a huge number. I don't quite know how they calculate that, but at least it underlines the fact that there has been a tragedy out there in terms of wildlife, and well, not just wildlife, livestock as well. It's dreadful what's happened, and I think it's it's distressing, but also whether it's just the wildlife populations, which are already under pressure from human activity, through to livestock. I mean, a lot of the breeding flocks and herds that they have taken maybe 30 or 40 years to breed. Yeah. So the potential loss, both in terms of wildlife but also in terms of agricultural production, is devastating. Yeah. Although billion, they'd be counting lizards and ants to get to that number, surely.
Yeah, well, not that I'm saying that it's not a tragedy, because obviously the images of koalas escaping fires and that you can't not be, you can't not react to that. I guess I'm looking at it more from the cynical point of view that it's usually that sort of thing that gets people focused on it rather than an obscure discussion or seemingly obscure discussion around the theoretical potential of this sort of stuff happening.
Yeah, well, that's it. 5 of the top 10 Hollywood movies all to do with animals. There's nothing more emotive, I think, for humans, given our love of cats online and other animal sort of things. We feel empathy for them much better than we do for other humans. So a tragedy like this is something, it's another wake-up call as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There was one more story I wanted to touch on, which was actually from a few years ago about it wasn't smoke, but it was a heat wave that killed 1 million US seabirds, or so they're saying. And it's just to highlight another example of something else that's kind of extreme, because they couldn't work out how so many tens of thousands of these birds all died at once in one location, and they were able to sort of pinpoint that it was this sort of what they called the blob, a heat wave that killed them all. Again, it's I we keep circling the same discussion around. It's all examples, and I guess maybe just to finish up on, just to highlight how people can try to interpret these things, either they're just individual cases where these things have happened as opposed to a trend.
That's right. And that's once again, this is where people who try to deny this sort of thing are probably slightly correct. As an individual instance, no, like they're not in themselves a sign of climate change. However, when you have 4 or 5 or 6 of these things going on in really short timeframes, that is evidence that there is a trend that is occurring that is of great concern. And, the typical denier just cherry picks individual incidents, finds a reason for them that's individual, whether they blame the lack of back burning and that's the real reason it happened. It's got nothing to do with the, 44-degree day. It's that. But when you actually look back historically and you start to see increasing instances of these, and there are a whole lot of really different instances like this that are pointing to a climate change. And once again, climate change is not about temperature. It's about these really peculiar events that are leading to great stresses on living organisms on the planet.
Yeah. All right, Steve, we might wrap it up there. I usually go out on a Sunday afternoon. I'm not sure if I will, given
Wear your mask.
yeah, that's right. I might have to wear a mask when I go outside this afternoon.
To wear your mask.